Okay, moving on. So let's see, we'll come in with clay tubes. I see a little bit of a volume thing happening there, so kind of make that a little bit more puffy. And the pinky needs to maybe get carved in a bit further, so we can just kind of do that. And it looks like it might be a little bit shorter on that, the thickness there. So it's pretty well folded in there, and the look that you're going to get is it's going to be pretty small. So I kind of want to look at that little fold right there. So I'm just going to, and it looks like it lines up. Whoops! I need to be using the damn standard here. Right, kind of the middle point of that pinky, and then using Alt, you just kind of come in and add a little bit of volume with the damn standard. Definitely a little bit on the early side for this kind of stuff, but what the heck, right? Okay, the other thing I notice is that the thumb is, from this view, is pointing right down at the camera here, but on this side I've actually got a little bit of an angle to it. So what that means is probably need to look at the direction of the knuckle here. So this is what the reference I should be looking at. So let me just move the thumb over, so I can see that, yeah, I need to move that. So it's a little bit more horizontal, or I guess vertical in this case. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to kind of get here is the angle of that little planer outside of the thumb. So I'll use clay tubes, kind of push this down. Yeah, it might have been too much. And this can probably round it off a little bit. So again, that's clay tubes with the Alt brush, and I'll just kind of, looks like that might be a little bit too rough of a transition. So push that down, add a little volume there. And the corner there is actually a little bit high, so I'll bring that in. Push that up again. I'm just using damn standard here, and just block in some little wrinkles. So now I'll come back and look at it from the side. So obviously I went a little bit too deep with those wrinkles, so I think I'll back out of that a bit. Flatten brush here, still using the square alpha with a reduced focal shift, so it's a little bit more of a tighter fall off towards the edge. And I can see a little bit of a dent right in there, so I can just kind of, whoops, with damn standard, I'll just kind of push it in. I don't usually do a lot of kind of bigger carving with a damn standard brush, but every now and again. And then once again, just like we would do with clay tubes, with clay tubes, we'll come in with the flatten brush afterwards and clean it up a bit. So that tendon really kind of just follows the line of the thumb there, so I think I might snap the camera and using damn standard, just kind of come in. Add a bit of that. I can see something going on here, so we can do the same thing. We'll just add a little bit of a line. I guess that's the tendon for the thumb, so we'll kind of begin to block that stuff in, and then using clay tubes, a little negative space in there. Let's see, we'll come over here, add some volume finger, but I don't want to get too distracted before I get this thumb situation here resolved. So it's right now this is pretty flat, and the actual angle needs to be a little bit higher. So I will use the move brush here and then flatten to kind of pave this down back to that same view. So I'm starting to get there, kind of looking a little bit more like a fist. So this is still really prominent, and if I look at this, I feel like this is actually a pretty full space, whereas I've got this big dent back there, and I think that that might be contributing to how prominent that form is. So I'll just use clay tubes and kind of come in and fill it. Now because I did that little stretching maneuver, I don't have quite the polygon density here as I do on the rest of it, but it doesn't really matter because there's not that much detail back here. So it is not a big deal. And to get the wireframe to show up, that's called polyframe, and to make that happen, the hotkey for that is Shift F. You can also hit this button right here, and I think in the default UI it's going to be over here somewhere, so in case you really want to make that happen for yourself, I'm going to add this little bulge there, or just a little bit more of it, and maybe push that in a notch. And looks like there's a pretty good little kind of dip right here. I don't really have, but it's kind of hard to get from this angle, so I'm going to come over here and actually use the clay tubes just to kind of carve that back a little bit. Okay, that's looking a little puffy. So one of the things I see pretty frequently with people that are just getting going with ZBrush is it's a little bit tricky for them to maintain kind of a regular surface. They end up with something that looks kind of warbly. So I really like the clay tubes brush, just for kind of like clay tubes and flatten, just for filling in those uneven surfaces. It's kind of like filling little potholes. So just using the flatten brush here, kind of clean some of this stuff up so I can get a better read on it. That's obviously too prominent, so one little roll over with a smooth brush, kind of relax it a bit. Okay, so let's come back and look at this view. Maybe a little bit too far out with the thumb, that outside thumb knuckle there, but not quite far enough down here. So to make sure that happens, I think I'll just grab the move brush, the pretty small brush size, come back and look at it. Still feeling like, well, there might just not be enough of a dent. So looking at the negative space of what's going on there versus what I've got, a little bit of a slant on that little angle there. Maybe a little thicker in the middle finger. And I think, so I'm looking at the amount of space I have at the end there, and I think my thumb is a little bit too thin, and I think the issue is maybe the angle of it. So that's probably okay. So at this point, I'm starting to feel a little bit boxed in by the poly density. So I'm actually going to do another subdivision. Now, as you guys are doing these, if this is, you know, sort of your early state of your ZBrush career, this kind of area is going to be tricky for you because you're going to end up with a lot of polygon stretching, and the reason is you're asking the geometry to give you shapes that are not really supported by the edge flow. So you know, be patient. You'll sort of figure it out over time. Basically, the trick is you just don't want to ask any one polygon to do a whole lot of distortion. You want to try to keep that evenly distributed, and that's one of the benefits that you get by sort of being patient with your moving up in subdivisions, is if you make sure that the lower level shapes, the lower level subdivisions conform to the big shapes. As you go higher, you'll preserve that stuff. So I'm actually getting a pretty good shot of what the thumb looks like from right down this angle, and I can see I don't have quite enough meat there. So I'm going to kind of move this whole thing up a bit. It's a little bit tricky with the shadow here. I may be able to grab this different material. Now this material is going to have its own limitations, but it might be useful for figuring out what's going on with areas where it's real dark. And this is a custom material that unfortunately I can't make available to the wider public, but there's some other ones in here that are still pretty good for sculpting. So anyway, a minute ago I was talking about feeling boxed in by my poly count, the poly density. So I'm just going to go ahead and hit Control D, and now we're starting to get a lot more control. I'm going to come in and add a little bit of volume here to the knuckles. I don't want to head back over here because that's a crazy material. See if I've got a better shot. I'll look down here. So I've got that great big middle knuckle. Prominent index finger. So it looks pretty weird from this view because, well, I've got it a little bit closer from the front view, but all this means is I just need to basically bring the volume out, I think, for the fingers. And you can see very, very rough. It's totally fine. Clay tubes. Just kind of filling that in, and I can see there it does kind of go in directly underneath that knuckle, but then it kind of comes out a bit. And looking at the pinky, I can see I've got a little bit of volume. Same deal, so it's going to kind of cut in. Okay, so now I need to come in with my flatten brush and try to find some, well, it needs to be a little bit, I think a little bit fuller, a little rounder there. So again, this would be an example where having a nice 3/4 view would go a long way, so you could sort of see what's happening along that edge. So we'll just kind of calm this stuff down and take a look at what we've got left. So I've got kind of a rounded surface there, so I want to make sure that I preserve that. I think I'm going to come over here with the move brush and just kind of pull that out a little bit. So still just rocking the flatten brush here. Okay, so now let's look at some of these wrinkles here in a little bit more detail. We did a damn standard. So I've got this one here, and then a nice big one kind of over here with a little bit of a flat spot in the middle. No, unfortunately, I mean, I could totally just roll over to Photoshop and get this area here kind of blown up, but I don't think it's really super necessary for the sake of this tutorial. So that's just a little move brush there. And we'll come back to damn standard. So I recommend, if you're doing anything with folds in flesh, that you use the damn standard brush. There's some other ones like the slash brush, but you end up getting kind of an etched look. In fact, in this case, I could probably even use something like inflate or standard. But the thing I like about the damn standard is you get that kind of the shape, you know, sort of like the transition, smooth transition into the crevice versus just like a line. Okay, so still using the flatten brush here, and I can see maybe feels like my knuckle, it's got kind of a weird angle on it there. So what I'd like to do, and if I look up here I can see I've got actually a pretty good flat spot, is kind of define the difference here between where the pinky is and the ring finger. So I'm going to use the damn standard, Old Faithful, to kind of come in and hit that crevice, and then using clay tubes with the alt on, you can see the alt pops up. That's how you know that I'm subtracting. That's not immediately obvious from the sculpting. Whoops. Okay, so it looks like it actually goes out a little bit further over here. I'm going to add a little bit more, kind of looking at this area here. So I tend to be a little bit ADD with my sculpting, and I just am kind of constantly rotating around rather than focusing on one area, and that's probably a better way to go, because that way you don't end up with one area being really loved on and really detailed while the rest of the sculpt is still kind of unresolved. You want to make sure that you're kind of hitting everything with the same level of detail. Because you may have to make a big change and it would be sad to have to walk away from some nice sculpting because it was sitting on some bad underpinning big forms. So starting to get that pinky area a little bit further along. So I'm going to come in and hit those planes. Look at the ring finger here. So we use the clay tubes just to kind of, well, let's see. So if I'm looking at this, the index finger, or the middle finger is going to come down further. So I actually need to bring the ring finger back up a bit. So once again, back to damn standard. Give it a little bit of a bigger brush size. So this is going to kind of bring that crevice down without actually lowering where the ring finger's height is. So in this case, I'm going to drop it down a subdivision and then just kind of grab this stuff, invert the mask, give it a nice blur, and then using the move brush, maybe this will work. Doesn't always work, but I think that's okay. So you got a little issue up here that's going to need some resolution. But nice way to kind of get a little separation there. And I think I've got this little flat spot. So I'm just gonna, now there's another thing, I'll just mask that off and then blur it again, so I can kind of move that over without messing with my little finger too much. So I'm feeling like my thumb is a little bit too thin. I think it kind of works from that view, but maybe from this view, let's see, yeah, I'm gonna give it a little bit more volume down this way. And from this view, the index finger kind of blocks the entire middle finger. Now that might just be something that I'm going to get a little bit of a different input depending on what view I'm looking at. Again, that camera focal length of the cell phone is a little bit hard to pin down, but good enough for most applications. So let's do damn standard, make sure I'm at my highest subdivision. So the hotkey for moving up and down between your existing subdivisions is going to be Shift D to go down and just regular D to go up. And if you want to add a new subdivision, it's going to be Control D. And you can only add new subdivisions from the highest subdivision level. So this little tendon here, I think might be riding a little bit high. I'll just flatten it down, grab the damn standard, and kind of run it a little bit closer to the base of the wrist there. So this area here is my next least developed section. So I'll add a little cut, the damn standard, a little fold there, put a fold there. Kind of looking at this one. From that same point, I've got this next fold that'll run up into the thumb. Maybe come in and using a smaller brush size, define this separation between the thumb and the index finger a little bit better. And I've got a little bit of a snippet of the tip of it there. That's totally fine. And now let's see. We'll come over. I've got this little outer shape, which is going to kind of. So I'm looking at this curve here, so it's going to kind of bulge out and then go in, and then I'm going to have one more, this one right there, and it's just going to kind of, so I'm using the Alt brush here, go away and then kind of curve back up, so something like that maybe. So now I'm actually going to use an inflate brush. Actually, I guess magnify would be fine, so I'm going to reduce the intensity. I just kind of want to blow that up. So I added the volume, added the general shape, but it's this weird little point. So now I'm going to use my inflate to just kind of fill that out. Same deal with this over here. I guess I need a really small brush size, and I'm going to turn lazy mouse on, and then grab my flatten brush. And then back to dam standard, because the deepest crack, it looks like, is right there. So that's going to be on the inside of this one. And then there's another small one. And all of these are sort of terminating nicely into the finger, in the reference anyway. So I'll try to do something similar here. You can see that's basically a straight line. So I want to make sure I don't have too many wild gyrations happening on the outside there. So let's see. I unfortunately don't have a lot of information about what's happening here. It'd be nice to kind of get an idea of what that depth was, but I can see that there is a significant amount of depth. I think maybe that needs to be a little bit of a straighter line. And I'm going to use my pinch brush here to pull these features together, because I feel like that was maybe a little bit too far apart. But this is starting to get into arguably a little bit too much detail for where I am right now. Considering this whole area here is still pretty rough. So let's just come down and take a look at it. So I know I'm going to have a little gap here. I'm going to have to just kind of rely on my guesswork, previous experience. I guess I do have this nice reference there. So I'm going to use the dam standard just to kind of define that line. Kind of pull these out a little bit. Use the flatten brush here. Now sometimes you'll run into a situation, let me see if I can get it to happen, where I'm working over here and you get a problem where the brush is kind of hitting areas where you don't necessarily want it to hit. You can obviously mask those areas off like I did earlier, or you can also sometimes get good results by turning on backface masking. So for me, I've pulled backface mask out all the time, over here because I use it all the time. Otherwise it lives in brush, auto masking, and then backface mask right here. So again, this UI will be available to you if you'd like to grab it. The default ZBrush UI is a little bit ungainly. People don't love it, typically. But it's really, really easy to customize, so it kind of doesn't matter. Alright, so right now I think the biggest problem is this thumb shape is just not really gelling. So I'm looking at that line there, and it's pretty straight, but mine's got a little bit of a bow to it. So I think I'm going to bring the top part of that knuckle out. And then maybe a little clay tubes. Push it back a notch and fill it in. Still going out too far. Hit it with the flatten brush and resolve that stuff. So now it's looking too far, the knuckle is just a little bit too prominent this way, and this may be a situation where the reference just isn't going to give me a straight answer. So now I want to kind of do a little test here. So I'm looking at this knuckle, and let's say from this view it kind of lines up with where the pinky is, and I've got that actually happening. That seems good. There still seems to be something off a little bit about it. So I'm kind of looking at some of these thicknesses here. Let me bring my index finger out a little bit more prominently. It's a little bit pointier there. So I'm just going to mask off the, let me switch to my mask lasso brush here. Mask off that thumb. And we'll grab the move brush and just kind of pull it out. Make sure that the index finger comes along. Maybe too much on that middle finger. So I'm going to, I really wish I had a shot of that thumb from the straight time version, but what I kind of know about thumbs is they tend to be a little bit thicker towards the middle of the last knuckle there. The pretty prominent knuckle. Digit, whatever that is, this last little section. So I'm going to use the clay tubes, add a little bit of volume. And what I want is for there to be a pretty, like from the front, the top of the thumb needs to kind of be, you know, this will be the outside of the thumb, and so this also needs to be the next outside of the thumb. So it needs to line up nicely, and I feel like it's just slanted in a little bit on the inside there. So I'll go to flatten brush. Okay. So looking from this view, I kind of want to see what's happening with that shape there. I'm actually not too far off from that, I don't think. I think maybe the... Let me switch to this other material. So it's still definitely on the thin side there. That might just be... So when I'm saying thin, I'm looking at how thick it is here versus what I've got there. So I'm just going to kind of pull that in. And I know I'm getting a little bit of an issue here with my finger, but that's not a big deal. Just add a little bit of that volume back in. So let's see. Still kind of too thick in here. Those are pretty minimal features, so I'm just going to use pinch to kind of come in. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And I want to round out that last little knuckle there. Right now it's feeling just a little bit messy, so I'll just clean it up a little bit. I'm going to come back to damn standard and push this crevice in a little bit deeper. Same thing here. And I know somewhere in there is my index finger. Probably do a little bit better job there. So let's just add a little bit more for a little spot there. So go to clay tubes. And pull it up a little bit using the move brush. I'll come in with the flatten brush. Settle it back down a little bit. So I'm going to look at the the angle here. It's a little bit flatter. I've got it kind of up a bit, and I think that might be from when I modified the position, looking at the height from this side. So I want to make sure I get that knuckle angle correctly, and that's feeling like I need to just move all this stuff up a bit. And I'm going to round off that pinky finger. And so on and so forth. I want to use the smooth brush to just kind of clean this up a little bit, but if I just hit it, it's going to kind of maybe melt it too much. So I'm going to hold shift, and you can see the Z intensity by default is 100. I'm just going to walk it back. Something a little bit more mild. Just to clean that stuff up in there a little bit. Not too much. Okay, hold shift key, go back to 100. Let's see, so for the very last part of this, I'm just going to round that off. It still feels just a little bit too prominent, so using the flatten brush, that might be a little bit better. And then we'll just keep, sorry, I think it was the clay tubes. So clay tubes there. So still feel like I might be missing some volume here at the top, this section right there. I can kind of see it there. So there's definitely more to go, but we're getting close. So try to finish this up in the next half hour here.